Today, on Monster Piece Classic, the ever-charming and not at all outdated Manhattan, and at 7, the super awesome and not dusty or crusty Centaur, or for viewers on the West Coast, the Minotaur. Hey, it's Tim here, your average dungeon master and your amateur bar master. Today, I'm updating a few classics, the Manhattan, the Centaur, and the Minotaur. The Manhattan is considered one of the oldest cocktails, and it's a classic for a reason. Some people think the classic monsters are the Universal Pictures monsters, Frankenstein, werewolf. I'd go back to Greek myth for my monsters. Two of the most classic Greek monsters are the Minotaur and the Centaur. So while I make my classic Manhattan variation, I'm going to talk about the Centaur and the Minotaur a little bit. First of all, the Manhattan. It's a formula of rye whiskey, sweet vermouth, bitters, stirred over ice with a garnish. First variation is the Blanc Manhattan, a well-known variation, made with rye and Amaro. So I've got two different whiskeys here. One is an Indiana sour mash called Ode Co. It's a sour mash whiskey made in northern Indiana. And I'm going to substitute that in for my rye in my Blanc Manhattan. Got my mixing glass out, chilled with ice. I'm going to break up some of this ice. One of the reasons that people get so fanatical about cocktails is because the more you get into it, the more you see that little changes to the cocktail make it a little bit different every time. And those little attention to detail type things start to make different drinks. For example, the mixing glass that I'm using, filling it with big pieces of ice that have been sitting out for about 10 minutes at this point, is going to be different than mixing your cocktail in a glass, stirring it over a large rock of ice in a glass, or stirring it over small pebble ice, for example, or stirring it over ice that you get out of your ice maker. Each one of those types of ice are going to get you a little bit different level of dilution in your drink. So usually when you go to a bar and get a cocktail, you're going to have it stirred longer, probably over smaller ice that melts faster and it dilutes the drink more. By the way, the Amaro that I'm using for my Blanc Manhattan is Amaro di Toscana. You want a little bit of a sweeter Amaro to replace the sweet vermouth. And so I'm using a sweeter Amaro that I like. And then of my Edwin Co. sour mash, I am gonna go 2 ounces. It's not quite as high proof as a rye. This classic variation changes up things because sometimes we learn things and we want to change things. So the change here, as we develop more and more different Amaros, leads to more combinations. We develop more whiskeys, especially local whiskeys that we want to try, and they have a little bit different characteristics. And it's okay to change things. By the way, the Blanc Manhattan combines orange and Angostura bitters. So I'm going to do a dash of each. I'm going to stir this until the ice has rounded off and settled down into the liquid. The drink you get at a bar might be a little different than one you might make at home by default, because it's going to be a little more diluted because the ice usually is smaller and or has been sitting out longer in an ice chest or something like that. So try your drinks at home with a little bit more water, your stirred drinks with a little bit more water, and see if you've been having trouble replicating bar drinks. So the Minotaur in Greek mythology is the Minotaur, capital V. There's only one Minotaur in Greek myth. The Minotaur was a result of a punishment put on the king of Crete, King Minos, as a result of him insulting Poseidon. If you don't want to lose your innocence, then don't look up the myth of the Minotaur, the whole thing, because it's quite disturbing. All that to say, there's one Minotaur, and it was locked away in the labyrinth. The Minotaur is big and brutish, but also maybe kind of wise because it lives in the labyrinth and it can find its way around the labyrinth. So I don't know, maybe it's like dumb and smart. As we move into 5th edition Monster Manual, it's pretty generic, like most of the book's monsters. It's very bland. So I like to mess with the monsters in the Monster Manual because they're so bland. They usually have a few flavored attacks that just do the same thing. So for example, the Centaur has a charge attack and a hoof attack. A lot of animals and beasts have a charge attack. It's basically you move, you get extra damage if they moved on that turn. That's pretty boring. And then the hoof attack, again, is just a bludgeoning attack. It just does bludgeoning damage. They just call it a hoof attack. It doesn't do anything special. Really low AC at 12, so they're really probably not going to last So they're probably not going to last more than a round in combat. And I think we can do better. By the way, I'm going to garnish this Black Manhattan with a lemon peel. I'm going to do both my drinks with lemon peel because I like it better than a cherry. That's just personal opinion. Lemon's too dry. Okay, screw this. Okay, well, my hands smell like lemon now. All right, we're going to garnish this with a cocktail cherry. Brings out the sweeter side. So there's my Black Manhattan, there's my Elk Centaur. Again, I'm going to try and craft abilities for this that compensate for its weaknesses and deliver on the fantasies. I get inspired by these models that I get. This is from Rocketpig Games. I printed it, painted it at home. So this Elktar, this Minotaur variation, is strong. He looks big and strong, and he's got this huge bow, and he's a ranged utility piece. Keeping those two things in mind, I craft a couple abilities. One, he's tall, right? He's got a good vantage point, so he ignores half and three-quarters cover. Two, since he's big, he's steady. So I gave him something to do with his bonus action. I think monsters need more to do with their bonus actions and reactions. So for his bonus action, if he doesn't move, he can take an extra shot with his longbow. It's a good idea to keep in mind trade-offs. So if you're going to give them something additional, you need to think about what they're sacrificing to do that. The other thing, this massive bow, delivering on that promise, he fires huge arrows with this massive bow. He can fire giant arrows that can knock an enemy prone when they hit. Additionally, because he's an elk, and I think elks are cool and wise, they seem like the guardians of the forest, he's watchful. So I gave him something to do with his reaction, where he can use his reaction to make a ranged attack against an enemy that moves within his line of sight. If he has clear line of sight and the target's within 50 feet, he can use his reaction to take a shot at you. By the way, cheers with the Black Manhattan. Last thing that I do, I'm trying to think about what weaknesses he's going to have, what weaknesses I want him to have. He needs to have a weakness. So his weakness is going to be when the players get into melee range with him. So he's going to have something to keep them from getting into range with him. One, he can knock enemies prone with his shots. That cuts your movement in half, basically. Two, he has an ability where he can split his arrow into a palisade. So he takes this massive bow, fires these huge arrows, and special arrows that split into a palisade wall, land in the ground, and create a barrier. That's kind of changes the battlefield. It also gives the players a little bit of cover, a little bit of a trade-off. That's my Elktar and his Centaur army, and my Black Manhattan. All right, we'll set that aside. All right, I'm going to use the same mixing glass because I don't want to get up and get new ice. Still making a whiskey drink, so I'm comfortable using this again. But this time I'm going to make a white Manhattan or a Blanc Manhattan. So again, the regular Manhattan made with rye and sweet vermouth. This one I'm going to make with bourbon and Blanc Vermouth. So with Blanc Vermouth, this is going to be a very dry drink. This is extra dry, Noli Prat, or Noli Pro. How do you say in French? Probably don't say the L. Noli Prat. Noli Prat, extra dry, Blanc. Use 3/4 of an ounce of this. So trading out sweet vermouth to an extra dry vermouth. And then I'm going to go with a bourbon here because I want to round out the dryness of this a little bit and let the vermouth have its moment because it's kind of a diva. Again, I'm going to go with 2 ounces of the bourbon. This is actually a cider finished bourbon, finished in cider barrels from Old Hammer here in Indiana. Drink local. Pour that in. My ice is obviously already rounded off and settled down in, so I don't have as good of a gauge this time, but I'm going to stir until I see a frosting start to happen on the outside of the glass, which is longer than you might think. The Centaur in myth was a prolific monster. There's a lot of centaurs. There were groups of centaurs, civilizations of centaurs in Greek myth and others. The Centaur in Greek myth was kind of a way for the Greeks, as with most of their myths, it was a way for them to explain the world around them. And the Centaur was an example of the civilized world transitioning to the wild world, and the Centaur was that representation for them. I forgot to add bitters. That's okay. I stirred it up. I'm going to add just orange bitters to this because I want to accentuate the orange and floral notes of the vermouth. So I'm going to get 2 dashes of orange bitters. So the Centaur, the promise of the Centaur creature, well, it's fast because it's got a horse body, strong and powerful. We need to deliver on that promise. This particular one has this huge glaive, So that's cool. And then he's got these skulls all around him. Looks like maybe, he's pretty vicious. So we're going to deliver on the promise of this model here while I pour my drink. The Centaur in 5th edition Monster Manual, again, is lacking. Again, has a charge attack and hooves and a low AC. Oh, I screwed up. By the way, the Minotaur has gore attack, not charge, but they're basically the same. They just do damage, and they just call it different things. So we'll turn that promise of an interesting monster into some cool mechanics. The Centaur, this fast melee, looks like a beheader. For one, he's tall. What does tall mean? Well, for this guy, he can stand over an enemy that's prone and prevent them from standing up. By the way, cheers. So a very dry drink, like I said, not sweet at all. And if you're not used to that, that can be quite shocking. This is a delicious representation of the bourbon, this cider barrel finished bourbon, and the Blanc Vermouth, this floral, bitter, dry orange vermouth. All right, so my Centaur with his glaive, I'm going to give him some interesting things, and who's to say that creatures can't have player abilities? So my Centaur has Polearm Master and Sentinel. So he can attack enemies that move into his threatened range, and if he hits an enemy, it can't move. That'll be a nice surprise for my players when they think, oh, all these cool things that I can do, all of a sudden a monster does one of them. That's going to be a nice little kick in the pants. Let's change his charge attack. So charge in the monster manual, a few monsters have it. If you move at least 10 feet and you hit an enemy, you do extra damage. Great, boring. The charge attack for this fast, powerful Centaur, let's do 2 things here. If he charges and he hits, he knocks you down. You gotta make a save or you fall. And if you do fall, he can grapple you. Cool. He's got like a chain or something, let's say, on there, and he wraps it around your feet, like in Back to the Future and Troy. He grapples you, and then if he's got a creature grappled, he can use his bonus action to dash. Cool. When he does that, look at this. He's got these cool spikes and stuff on his armor. He's got all this stuff sticking off of him. So if he's charging as a bonus action, he moves up to his speed, and he can do a drive-by attack. Anybody he runs by, anybody within 5 feet of his movement space, has to make a dex save or take slashing damage as he runs by them. Let's say he has to do that in a straight line, just for a trade-off, right? We got to keep things in check. We got to have trade-offs. So he has to do that in a straight line. And last but not least, he is a beheader. His glaive is a vicious weapon. How about a vorpal weapon even? He crits on an 18, 19, or 20 on the die. This powerful, fast melee creature, he's got some weaknesses, right? He's going to be weak to range. He does not have a ranged attack. He can move, but if he gets locked down, he'll be in trouble. And let's say he's one weak stat is intelligence. So there you have it. There's my black and white Manhattans, updated classics, and there's my Centaur and Minotaur, updated classics.